So Bjorn, where are you right now? Are you in New York?
No, I'm in Wyoming.
Oh, Wyoming. Is that
Yeah,
home?
that's home. I'm in my hometown, Wilson, Wyoming. Well, it's dark outside now. Otherwise, I'll show you beautiful
Oh, trust
mountains
me,
outside
it's
my
dark
window here.
everywhere.
When you
Yeah.
say hometown, is that where you grew up?
No, that's where I live
Yeah,
now. I grew up in Sweden. As
nice.
of 1 year ago, I'm a citizen of the wonderful state of Wyoming.
All right, nice. I guess we always like to start with early days. We could talk about your upbringing. You mentioned you grew up in Sweden. Tell us what your childhood was like and what you were kind of interested in, and we'll go from there.
Such a long time ago, I'm not sure I remember much of it. No, I grew up I was born in a town called Östersund, which is in the sort of geographical midpoint of Sweden. It's in all senses and purposes, it's way up north, way up north. And it's gorgeous, beautiful landscape, very rural. It's home to some of the best skiing in Scandinavia. Um, so give you a little idea of maybe what it looks like. But very early, my parents moved to Stockholm. So from I was 3 years old, I grew up in Stockholm, which is the capital of Sweden. Today, I don't know how many live there. The greater urban area, probably close to 2 million people. It's a bustling, happening place. That's what I call my hometown. Every time I go back there, I feel, happy to be there. I feel it's a very beautiful city. And in the summer, you have the archipelago with all it's an excellent place for sailing and boating and fishing. And in the winter, we go ice skating on the frozen lakes and rivers and canals. It's beautiful, fun place. Very happening, very dynamic. I lived there until I was 38, 39. When I moved to the US, I built a software company in Stockholm and sold computer security solutions all over the world. And sold that in 97 and moved to Boston to work with the new owners. I thought I'd give the US a year to check it out, see what it's like. And lo and behold, I met my future wife and the mother of my children there, and life changed.
Mm-hmm.
Bjorn, you said that you lived in your hometown till about 38 years old. Uh, did you enjoy it there? Did you ever think that you would never leave, or why
Yeah.
ultimately? Yeah.
No, I thought I'd live there. Yeah. I mean, it's a very livable city. The quality of life there, I think, is pretty. It's up there in the top cities, in my opinion, that I've seen in the world when I've traveled. And I had no plans on moving. It's fun. I traveled a lot. All Swedes we travel. It's something we have inherited from the Vikings, I guess. We travel the world. We spend time all over the place, but we tend to, most of us, come back home after a few years abroad. But
And you ended up launching Oatly during that time, right? You were still there.
So what happened here? My brother invented. It's his fault, right? He came up with this wacky idea of milking oats. Who would have thought? Right? I mean, come on, can't do that, right? And why was the other reason? Why would you do that? But he's a professor in food chemistry at the Lund University, and he started playing around with milk alternatives and figuring out how you could make a better milk. And the background to that was that when he was a younger student, the professor he studied under was the guy that earlier had discovered lactose intolerance. So you could say academically, he grew up in an environment where milk equals issues for some, and the more he studied, it turned out to be that milk equals issues for more and more. And today, it actually equals a lot of issues for the planet. So he was intrigued, I guess is the word, and curious scientist, playing around with how can I make a better milk? And we're now talking late 1980s, right? So, as a university professor, you don't get much funding if you sit there and play around. So it relied on putting together a team of like-minded scientists and It tested all kinds of raw material and landed quite quickly in oats for many good reasons. By 94, he realized that he had something he could patent, and somewhere there in 94, 95, he actually formed a little company around it. No funding and really very little support from the world. One of his early friends and colleagues from the university at that time was lead scientist, head of research for the largest dairy company in Sweden. So he invited him down to come and, proud, come check out what I just did, what I cooked up in the lab. And the guy came down.
What were you doing at the time?
So I was building a software company at that time. I graduated from university in the mid '80s, and very quickly, together with a couple of my buddies, started building a computer security company. And I ran sales and marketing for that for what turned out to be about 10 years. And that took me all over the world, selling security solutions to governments, large companies, large corporations, banks. We did a lot with banks all over the world, which was quite exciting. And that's the company I sold in 97 that subsequently took me to two things instrumental in my life with that transaction, right? First of all, I freed up some cash, which is always nice to have. And I started to look around me where to invest. And there was my brother sitting in his little office trying to figure out what the heck to do with the oat milk. So I decided to join him for a number of reasons, and maybe come back to that. The other, obviously, important aspect of my move to the U.S. was what I said earlier. I met my future wife. So we settled when we started dating. So I joined him in 97, right? And at that time, Oatly, the brand Oatly didn't exist. We were looking at, what intrigued me, what attracted me to the whole idea was that we were all sitting, at home, my family, my parents, my other brothers, and we were looking at this, glass of milk. I wonder what the heck do you do with that, because it tastes great, and my mother loved to cook with it, and she baked bread with it and found that baked bread tastes better. But there's no market for such a invention in Sweden at that time. So it intrigued me in the sense that it's a phenomenal marketing challenge. How do you bring something to the market that nobody knows what it is? And we obviously also very quickly saw all the health benefits with the dietary fibers, its ability to reduce cholesterol, and add to that versatility. You could do anything you could do with milk, more or less, you could do with our oat milk. So we started figuring out a plan, a go-to-market plan, and our first idea was to sell it as an ingredient to the food industry, so we didn't have to go through the whole rigmarole of building our own brand, which takes time, is expensive, and has a lot of challenges on its own, right? So that's how we launched, and I actually was successful to land a deal with Danone, no less, very quickly. And Danone decided to launch a plant-based yogurt in France. We are now talking 1998, 1999. So I thought that was an easy, next kind of thing. Was a very instrumental learning for us too in our journey. We were doing our own yogurts in our lab in Sweden and thought they were pretty decent. And then we supplied Danone. Danone taught us how to produce with even quality and sent us 10 binders, a whole bookshelf of quality manuals that we had to adhere to. That taught us a lot about production, scaling production, and instrumental learnings, great findings for our future journey. But when it came to product development and to market positioning, we very quickly realized that Danone, they didn't promote the product on its own benefits. And afterwards, you could clearly realize why. They couldn't, of course, launch a non-plant-based dairy that would aggressively sort of go after their dairy alternatives, right? So they had to wash it down, and what was left was nothing. There was no real reason to buy, presented to the market. And it didn't help that the product actually didn't taste very well either, despite the Danone lecturing us on how good they were at consumer testing and product development, and which I guess you could say they are, right? But what we learned from that was that it's pointless testing new products on consumers. Danone, with all their expertise, experience, and money, clearly failed. So why even bother when we could sit in an office and realize that it didn't taste good at all? So I don't know how they managed to fool themselves. But after 1 year in the market, massive marketing, TV commercials, everything, they pulled the product from the market. And that's when we decided that, okay, we can't rely on going through others to, we are the only people on the planet that understand and know how to present the story. So why should we rely on?
Yeah, and before we kind of talk about what happens after this, I'm curious, kind of going back a little bit. You mentioned, you had sold this software company. That and I'm curious, you mentioned you were able to get a little cash out of that. Were you like financially free at that point? Like, did you have to worry about money after that point? And also, it's a kind of a two-part question. Like, growing up, was money tight, or was it something that you felt like you had sort of enough of that you could go out and venture on your own and not, take these risks without having too much of a kind of a fallback?
I grew up in a very classic sort of Swedish middle-class home. Money wasn't tight, but we were four brothers. Both my parents worked. My dad was in the Swedish defense industry, sort of engineer, not very high pay. My mother was a dietitian, nutritionist, working for a hospital. So classic sort of middle class. We lived in a middle class suburb, and I guess I grew up knowing that money is scarce in some sense. It wasn't that we could buy fancy cars and go on luxury travels all over the world, right? But we had a very loving family, and I think I grew up in a very safe environment. And I thought about that many times in other situations. Maybe my formative years there built some kind of confidence in me that I became a notorious risk taker. I guess I never had to be afraid. There was always a home base to take care of me somehow, maybe.
Is there anything else maybe you can think of as to why you're that way? Like why you're more prone to maybe taking risks and wanting to be an entrepreneur, maybe like from a younger age? Was that something that you sort of set out to do, or did you just fall into that naturally?
I just fell into it. When I went 4 years in college, I had no perception at all of me starting a company until one of the very last presentations in the last month in college, when they had a class where they talked about and some of the successful entrepreneurs, early IT entrepreneurs in Sweden at that time, that were graduates from our school, came and presented how they had journeyed from after leaving college. I was just dead set, like most kids in my part of the world at that time, to go and work for the big Volvo, Ericsson, Saab, the big Swedish industrial complex companies, right, that were all over the world. And there's a dozen of them in Sweden, Tetra Pak, and But when I think the light bulbs went on when I heard that and started realizing that, well, that's another alternative. And I guess I always, I don't know why, introspective and psychological analysis of yourself, but I always felt in my life as a kid and everything. So if everybody goes to the left, I turn right. It's sort of, I don't want to do what everybody else does. I don't see any fun. And I mean, I don't want to, I'm not saying I'm a leader in that sense, but I don't want to follow the pack, right? It's somehow been ingrained in me.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
And I love that you mentioned that, sort of zigging when everyone is zagging, right? Like going one way when everyone is going in another way. And it's something I think about a lot too, where I kind of tend to be the same way, but it is pretty exhausting, right? Sometimes
Yeah,
it's like you don't because it's an unknown. It's a big unknown,
yeah,
and if the crowd is thinking one thing or going in one direction, I'm naturally skeptical to be like, oh, what's like the end solution here, and is there like a better way of doing things or going in another direction? But you never know. Like you could be setting yourself up for failure
yeah.
at the same time, and so. Is that something that you've had to like grapple with, like personally?
Well, I
Like,
think, of course, in those times, early days, right, I didn't think about this at all. It was just a natural sort of, I don't want to, I didn't want to follow the herd. And I guess it came back to the fact that I had a solid, sort of comfortable platform to start. I didn't, there was never in my mind that I could fail, right? Or if I would fall, knock down and fall over. I'd just, stand up and walk, take another path and walk another direction. I never had that sort of scare or risk of losing it all kind of thing, right? So I think that helped me build that mindset that I can go pretty much try to do anything, right? Well, I might, hit the wall, fall down, but I'll brush it off and keep going. And it's funny. Another aspect here that I find interesting is that I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and I have over my journey now I've come across a number of entrepreneurs that are always the youngest in a larger family, right? And I think we never had that overprotection as the first kid gets, maybe, nor the expectations that often falls on the shoulders of the most senior kid. I don't know. It'd be fun to hear a psychologist comment on that, right? But there is something here. Why is it that there's so many, at least in my myopic world that I have met among entrepreneurs, very often are the youngest in a cull of a family. So somehow, somewhere around there, I came into the world and I picked my journey and I wanted to go find my own path. I was never, I hitched across when I was 20 years old. I hitched alone across the United States and Mexico for 5 months. Very few of my friends that did that, it's.
Bjorn, you mentioned earlier that your brother had started kind of experimenting and obviously came up with what we now know as Oatly. And, I would probably say that a lot of people heard about Oatly in the last few years, at least in the United States, or at least where we are in our groups. And obviously, it wasn't around for only 4, 5, 6 years. It's been around for now 25 plus years, or almost 25 years. Um, you mentioned entrepreneurship being, obviously risky, and sometimes you just kind of hit some walls. Why did you join him early on? I mean,
Yeah,
because you think about it now and you think, oh, obviously it's an oat milk company, how it's going to work out. 25 years ago, you tell that to my dad, who's now, 65 years old, and he's thinking, what's wrong with you? Like, why, like, seriously, what's wrong with you?
I tell you, a lot of people that told me that I should go seek help, professional help. So there's a couple of fun stories around it, right? But so I built a 10-year, rather successful career in computer security, right? We were very unique in our crypto solutions and sold to all the biggest banks in the world and governments and all that kind of stuff. We were the coolest kids on the block. I mean, we were the shit those days, right? I mean, there was no question about that. And moved to the U.S., merged. We sold to a U.S. company out of Boston, and they, schlepped me over there in handcuffs and locked me up in a corner office with a fancy, mahogany desk for a year. It was fun. I had a great time there. But I also, the last year before selling, we grew 100%. We doubled the size of the company. I was burnt out. I didn't realize that at the time, but I started really when I sat down and the work pace dropped dramatically in a public U.S. company. Right? It was just a whole different world from my entrepreneurial world. And I just started feeling that I want to do something completely different in my life. Now I've been here, done this, right? So when I resigned, first I told many others, but I told my CEO, that Art, good guy, we had a great contact, that I'm leaving. I'm going back to Sweden. I'm going to work with my brother and his oat milk company, because the term oat milk didn't exist. Nobody had ever heard it before. Nobody knew what it was. He thought I said goat milk. And he got furious, right? What the heck are you doing? You have an incredible career opportunity in this industry. You can do blah, 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 blah. And you're going to go home and milk goats? so obviously, I explained the true story to it, and people start gradually, as people learned what it was, got more and more interested. But boy, have I ever, on those many years in the beginning, they wondered, what the heck did I do this for? But it was something in this product that we just, we sat there, we drank it, we tasted it, it had legs. You could feel it, you could touch it, you could smell it. There was something in here, right? And soy milk started coming up on the market, and I probably 97, first time I went to Expo West, and saw all these
What
soy
year was
milk.
that, Bjorn?
I think 97, could have been 98. And went to Expo West and started seeing what were the leading brands at that time, Eden Soy maybe, and West Soy, whatever, right? I don't think most of them don't exist, at least not in that shape and form anymore. And they all tasted awful, in my humble opinion, right? And they were not anywhere near as versatile. And I think the whole plant-based dairy market in the US at that time was probably touching maybe 200 million in consumer value, right? So maybe 100 million on manufacturing level. I don't know, somewhere around there. But it's sort of like, wait a minute, we have a better product. Actually 2 years earlier, I was still in my software company. I was spending time in England. I was setting up our subsidiary in England. And my brother came down, and actually with his little team, 2-3 people, and we're trying to test to get into the UK market. And so they were exhibiting at a food show. I'd never been to a food show before, because I only, as a cool kid in the IT industry in those days, I only went to the really cool trade shows, right, where all the cool guys were. And we learned in that industry, when you're in a booth and you're presenting your technology, your software, people come in and they have opinions. Oh, don't worry, we'll fix that. That's just a bug. We can come and we have that in our next release. That will come. You could fake it until you made it. It still works, I guess, in many ways in the tech industry, right? Well, try that in the food industry for a starter, right? So there was an eye-opening moment for me when I realized that people came into the booth, they actually eat your product or drink it. There's no room for an excuse. We'll fix that little taste problem and that bitter aftertaste. Don't worry. That's just a bug, right? You get that sort of immediate feedback and immediate reaction from the consumer. And I realized that I've been in business to business, and consumer marketing was to me a big unknown, but intrigued me tremendously. So last couple of years in my IT journey, I sort of looked with envy more and more at my brothers and the whole food industry. It just opened up mind-blowing opportunities. And so I think at the end of the day, the jump from IT to oat milk wasn't that difficult for me. I was just totally ready to do something new.
And talking about, going back to what you're saying about early on, you wanted to go through different avenues, like, for example, working with a company like Dannon, who had the distribution that you could sort of sell this product to as an ingredient for them. But then seeing that wasn't a good sort of, solution for you guys as a business, when you decided to transition into creating your own brand, what did that look like? I mean, was it difficult, like getting it into the stores? Like, how did you go about doing all that?
Yeah, it was a big challenge, right? It was definitely difficult. We had most people, it put us also in the perspective of being in Sweden at that time. very few food companies out of Sweden. Probably the best known food, if you can call it food, is Absolute Vodka, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when
right.
and the plant-based sort of the people that were into the plant-based foods, were they mostly in the US at the time?
Well, they were worldwide. UK was probably the only market in Europe of some significance, right? But yes, the whole movement started in the US, indisputably so. No question about it, right? And so we were in Sweden, where you have much higher per capita consumption of milk than the US, much lower frequency or prevalence of lactose intolerance than the US. We were in a country where milk was holy. I remember when I was a 6-year-old, I used to hand milk cows in our neighbor up in the north. Anyway, that's a long story, but so the milk was holy. And so to come here and try to launch a product on a market where there were no dairy alternatives out there, and nobody, what do you mean, milk? What's the problem?
Yeah.
So it was pretty logical to start looking at we worked with a big Unilever on the ice cream side. We worked with, I think it was Nestle, somebody on the chocolate side, and we worked with Danone on the yogurt side, and we started seeing opportunities. But you learn a couple of things there, right? You're one step removed from the consumers. You really don't get the consumer feedback. That stays with your customer, and they don't share that with you. So you were just like playing in darkness, really have no idea what was going on, right? What we did learn over these first years is that, okay, so we are in Sweden. There's very few references. Very few people have started food companies, sort of the new modern traditional type of, branding and cool, happy, fancy. You could buy Swedish lingonberries and salmon and herring, and that was kind of it, right? Potatoes. But to start and go after with consumer marketing, nobody's ever done that before. But what we did learn and realize during these Danone and ingredient years is that, okay, so we have maybe Sweden is top 10 in per dairy consumption. But if you have high dairy consumption, there is 2 to 3% of all children that are born, and this is pretty much globally, consistently, are milk protein allergic. That's a very different thing from being lactose intolerant, right? Milk protein allergies in most cases disappear after when kids reach the age of somewhere between 7 and 11, 12 or so, right? Some keep it for their entire life, but they're a much smaller group. So you'd say, okay, so a couple of percent of kids, what's the big deal? There's no market there. Well, if you look at the life situation for these children, right, they can't have birthday parties with all their friends and eat the same food. Their parents and their siblings can't eat the same food, or rather, can't prepare a meal at home using the same pots and pans. And it becomes a life quality challenge that is pretty significant. So if you can go in and help these 2, 3, 4% kids, it actually touches a much larger population. And that intrigued us. And that's when we launched Oatly 2001. Our first target audience was families with milk protein allergic children. We got a lot of support from healthcare providers, from retailers. Oh, finally we have a solution, right? So we could ride sort of a very unique, specific angle to get into a market, and therefore also to really make a difference. We realized that we very early on had to have a fairly wide product portfolio. So we launched a milk, we launched a line of ice creams, we launched cooking creams, and a couple of other products actually at the same time, day one in 2001. And that helped us carve out the position that was big enough for us to create a small platform that we could, crawl up on and finally put up on our knees and build.
And throughout this time, did you serve as the CEO, or did you hire someone to? to
So
serve as a
I
CEO?
was I didn't know anything about retail, and so we hired a CEO to run sort of the operational aspect. Where my brother and I, so I was the chairman of the company. I ran all the financing, the strategic, business plan development, and had an oversight, right? But I didn't go and do the. Well, I participated. I helped out, but I had a guy from the food industry that been a senior executive, as it were, at the food distribution company. So I
And
never
Bjorn,
worked as a CEO.
Bjorn, in 2001, you guys were in the United States already, correct?
Well, no, we were not. So before we launched the brand Oatly, so when I joined my brother in '97, and I said I went to Expo West, right? There was this classic story of what happens if you're not controlling your own business, right? So my brother and his team, small, underfunded, they founded Importer and started doing some business in the UK. And that British company immediately turned around and tried to sell in the US. So we had a brand at the time called Mill Milk, and sort of, together with the partners there, where we were effectively the ingredient supplier into somebody that was trying to do a branded business. The first thing I did when I joined the company was to shut all that down because the company was so far from being ready for it. So I just killed all that and moved out of it because it was just a disaster. But it did trigger two competitors, Pacific and West Soy, I guess, to launch oat milk in the US, which was kind of interesting because the Pacific Oats is still around. But we were first in the US. Nobody can ever take that away from us.
How does it work when, and I don't know if, maybe you can explain this, but you mentioned, when your brother sort of came up with this and he had the patent, how does it work when other companies tried to create something similar? Like, did you have to license it to them, or was it a different formula? Like, for example, other companies that were offering oat milk?
Well, a good question, right? What we did, and the products that ended up in the US, we produced them, or we had a co-packer in Sweden that produced everything for us. So there was never a patent infringement. But another really interesting learning here, right? When we started, so Oatly is really the world's first true food tech company. It's real science going into it. It's deep science around proteins, enzymes, food processing, and oats, of course. And not only that, right? My brother, very early in the process, realized that oats was already then known to reduce cholesterol. So, Quaker Oats and General Mills made a big number out of that in the US. So he wanted to make sure that the oat milk he developed actually maintained, if not optimized the cholesterol lowering properties of oats. The whole world knew that oats reduced LDL cholesterol, but the interesting thing is that nobody in the world knew why. So that was sort of a really interesting scientific, challenge to understand the components, what's going on. So he started very early on bringing in clinical medical expertise to dive deeper into that. So that's also the background to how we could then patent a number of processes. It's not one patent; it's a whole bunch of patents, and over the years been added more. But this is, I would say, extremely in that time, in that period, extremely unique in the food industry that you had actually patents on a food product, right? We had some, so the traditional way of developing foods in bigger food companies to go to, it's sort of you go to a lab and you blend something, right? You go in the kitchen and you cook something up and you package it. Brutally expressed, but more or less so. And the industry, I'd say, particularly in the US at the time, I think the rest of the world is pretty good at it now too, is that you have the big companies and they follow trends and they see, okay, there's something happening in this space. So the world, somebody calls down to the guy down in the lab and it's like, okay, I need an oat milk. So I think the other last piece of tidbit there in the Oatly story is in the early days, already in the early days, we also realized that patents alone it's not enough to have the true sort of moat or the secret sauce is the best possible solution. Any listener here, if you want to get into the food industry, right? If the trinity of patents, a black box, secret something, and a strong brand, if you have those three, you're in an extremely strong competitive position, right? We didn't have the strong brand at that point, but combining those, we weren't afraid. So no, the early companies in the US were not infringing our patents. Their products were inferior, and that's why they never took off. They couldn't create that oat milk market. In fact, if anything, we were afraid that they would damage the category because people that tried them didn't like them. And a consumer, oh, oat milk, have you tried it? Yeah, I tried it a couple of years ago. It tasted blah, 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 right? So that was our biggest concern, actually, over the years, that
Bjorn,
inferior products would kill our opportunity. Go ahead.
There's obviously a lot that's happened, since launching Oatly to get to the point that we are today, and we don't have, hours to talk about all the 20 years. I wish we did. But what would you pinpoint as, a breakout moment in time for Oatly where it became this, widely recognized, known, loved brand that people obviously consume today, and I'm sure will for a long time?
Yeah, exactly. It's a great question, right? And so we launched 2001, very laser focused on a very niche market, right? And then we started adding to that vegans. There weren't many around in those days, but the few that were there were pretty vocal. We started looking at the cholesterol aspect, so that didn't really do much for us, but it was in there. And as you get a little bigger, you add more products, you can add more, rope in more people. Classic sort of bowling pin strategy, bowling pin alley, right? You sort of knock over the first ones, and then you get some ripple effects, and you go broader and broader. And if you look at the history of our packaging, you can follow sort of that evolution, right? And I think by 2011, 2012, when we started hitting maybe around 20 million in sales or so, that's when we started realizing that we had gotten enough inertia recognition that we could go mainstream, which is a whole different ballgame, right? And that's where we realized that we needed to completely rebuild our management team, for example, because we had a bunch of good people that understood niche marketing and whatnot. But to go broad mass market, it's just a whole different ballgame, right? And so we rebuilt the company, brought in a whole new set of senior managers that we handpicked, and all of them came from outside of the food industry, because we realized that in apparel, in electronics and whatnot, that you had much more skills in terms of understanding how to engage with consumers.
And what year was that? What year was that around that you're talking about in terms of hitting
2012. 2012. Okay. So that's when we brought the new Tony, our new CEO, on board. He joined late 2012 and had a very deep insights into consumer behavior and understanding consumers from his various experiences in the past. Right, none of them really including CPG sort of tactics. And I think still today, I'm surprised how poor most CPG companies really are at marketing. They are actually awful at it, and which is surprising in many ways, right? But so I think that was the first step there, to get another team that actually understood mass market, because we had come to a position, and we were really only in two markets at that time, Sweden and England, United Kingdom. And we were sort of revving up. The other thing that was a pivotal breakthrough for Oatly, a dramatic milestone in the history of Oatly, was that we finally, after years of research, managed to develop a product that worked extremely well in coffee. We've been trying the coffee market for years, and the reason is simple. If you look at global white milk consumption, and forgive me, I don't have the numbers fully accurate in front of me now, but I think somewhere between 60 and 70% of all white milk consumed globally is consumed in tea or coffee. So if you want to have a big impact, you need to function in tea or coffee, our first iterations of products didn't do that to the level where it was really an alternative that baristas would embrace. In 2014, we cracked the code, a completely new set of patents, and the idea is to work with no other. In the food industry, there's another secret, if you like. It's not secret, but you can do anything with food as long as you can add anything. You play with additives. You can create anything out of anything, right? But consumers don't want additives. So, and our philosophy was just the pure oats and water. That's it, right? So it's a question of enzymatically modifying protein structures, for example, in a way that is that is identical to how it's done inside the human body. So no strange, no hokey pokey here, but really true, tried, natural processing steps. So we had a new team on board that understood consumer branding, and all of a sudden we're sitting with a product that was ready to go after the mass market in a whole new way. What we learned in the development of the barista version was also that we're hitting a market where there was a big hole in the market. If you talk to the high-end baristas and coffee roasters in those days, and indeed still today, I would argue, I heard a story from one guy very eloquently described it, how he, as a coffee roaster, spent a good time of his life sourcing the best beans he could possibly find, right? And then he'll bring them home to his roasting facility, wherever that is, and spend, his soul and passion in producing the best coffee you could possibly pour in a cup, and serve that with pride in your coffee shop. And the damn consumer wants almond milk in it. That kills all the notes. Which, why did I do all this work if you don't appreciate my flavor? So we learned that there's a big demand for a plant-based alternative to milk that married the coffee notes, not killed them. There was no product in the market that did that.
That's super interesting. And at the time, were you in the US at all, or you were still in only England and Sweden?
Well, at this time, we're probably in maybe 10, 15 countries in
too?
Europe. Yeah, we Europe.
At what point do you guys expand out to the US, and what was that like? Because it was just, I think, like a few months ago, or like earlier this year, that you guys ended up going, or Oatly ended up going public, and it was a massive IPO. I think $1.5 billion or so, almost.
10 billion, actually.
And so, how big?
10 billion.
Oh, 10 billion. I must have read some article that was inaccurate. Thanks for that. 10 billion. Insane, right? And so, like, you would have had to have, I would assume, a pretty big market base, or like consumer base in the US, right? And so what point did you expand out here, and what was that launch like?
So when we gradually, we launched in the US the fall of 2016 at the New York Coffee Show. Maybe I have a different name, but yeah, more or less coffee exhibition, whatever. And we launched it to go after the coffee trade, because we have learned from Europe that we could take Berlin, we could take Amsterdam, we could take London, we could take all the big cities with our product, with our coffee concept. And we also learned very early on that the high-end barista world is actually quite small, and it's global. You have the World Championship for cupping and latte art and all that stuff. So these sort of leading, trend-setting baristas and coffee roasters globally met yearly, and they talk. And we could write and use that to our benefit and let them do the selling for us in many ways, right? And if you look at the coffee industry, it's actually quite a, you have to, Australia has a huge impact on trends in the coffee industry, as have the US West Coast and Japan. And yeah, so there's a couple of pockets, and if you can win there, the rest of the world will follow. Mm-hmm. The other aspect that we learned too very early on was that the consumers in these trend-setting third wave coffee shops globally were, the young, sort of the 15 to 30 maybe crowd. And they had much more in common with each other across the globe than they had with their parents, for example. So we learned very early from our tests in various European cities that exactly the same message. Very often we actually used English as the language, which everybody thought was a big no-no. You don't promote products using English language in Berlin or Hamburg or Helsinki or whatever, but Amsterdam. But it worked extremely well for us, the way we did it. So all these, stars just aligned, and it was more a question of building a launch plan for the US, because the biggest challenge is, of course, how do you handle supply, right? It really is not ideal to ship products from Europe because you lose time on the water, and in order to succeed in the US, you really need to be a refrigerated product, and therefore you have to produce locally. So they have a really challenging upfront sort of investment in building production capacity that you had to be, it's a big factor. And how the heck do you do that, right? And so we spent a lot of time and some fun times, 2015, 2016, as we scoped out the US launch plan. And we did an exclusive with the Intelligentsia for 3 months. So basically their core business was in Chicago of all places. So I don't know how many successful new food tech companies build their platform by launching in Chicago. It is usually always LA or
LA.
Florida or New York, right? But that was for 3 months, and that helped us get going. And Intelligentsia, still very good quality company, and a lot of people follow them. And 2017.
Bjorn, as one of the founders of Oatly, how involved were you and are you currently in Oatly's business and operations?
Well, so up until 2015, 2016, I spent a lot of time here in the U.S. and developed the regional plans. And then 2016, we took in external funding, major. How much did we raise? In our world, big funding, around 35 million or so, US 30 million maybe. I don't remember exactly now. So that was that was my big project that year, and after that I've had less of an active role. I'm on the board, so I'm involved in all kinds of fun kind of conversations. The whole IPO took a lot of resources from all of our board members, right? Or we spent a lot of time on that, and been involved up until then in many of the conversations we've had when we've raised funding, raised money along the road. Today, I'm very distanced from the actual operational side of the business.
Do you miss it?
Well, yes and no. It's such a big company now, right? With production in 3 continents, and I don't know, 1,500 employees or whatever. It's a different animal. But I would say this: I'm involved enough not to miss it. I can cherry pick more than anything, which is great. I have very good connection with the board and the senior management team. We have fun. We have a lot of fun. But I also, since 2008, my brother and I have built a separate business because we realized in those earlier days that we had this incredible R&D team that was all involved in Oatly, but we could do so much more than just develop products in the oat space, right? And we've been very intrigued by, and still are, and do a lot of work with trying to develop food products that deliver true health benefits. So learning on the early days of the cholesterol reduction, Oatly is really good at reducing LDL cholesterol. It's extremely potent at it, right? And that led us into the whole metabolic syndrome and started looking at blood pressure, blood sugar, cardiovascular disease, of course, with cholesterol, and then all kinds of stuff going on in that world, and around diabetes research and Alzheimer and etc., like cognitive function. So we built, in parallel with building Oatly since 2008, we built this company called Invention, which is a research company based in the south of Sweden. We have operations on pretty much all continents now: Hong Kong, Singapore, we are in India, we are in Africa, we are in South America. And that, small footprints, but stay close to stuff where things happen, and sourcing exotic ingredients, whether it's baobab from Africa or quinoa or growing oats in Bolivia at 12,000 feet above sea level. We co-created a company that mapped the oat genome 2 years ago, published that in, 3 years now, 2018. And behind me on the shelf.
I'm curious, actually. You've built this incredibly successful company, Oatly, right? And I'm just curious, what is do you have an ultimate goal you want to reach, with everything that you're doing? Is there, because I can imagine being in your position, you could just chill and hang out right now, right? You built this company, it's gone public.
That's what he's doing with us. That's what he's doing with us.
I mean, this is 1 hour of the day, but it sounds like, I don't know how much time you're spending across all these different projects and R&D things. I know that you have Good Idea drinks, which I see Good Idea behind you, which we could talk about too, but there's a lot going on, I imagine. And so what keeps you going? What is there an ultimate goal that you haven't hit yet that you want to hit? What is that? Or do you just enjoy building things and doesn't really?
Well, it's very much the latter, right? I want to have fun. My goal is to simplify my life. And that's a bigger challenge in many ways than so much else. But I think in some ways, when I sold my software company and that time before joining my brother, I could have sort of retired, and I did for a while. And the first couple of years I worked with my brother, I was fairly passive. I had actually a golden, really cool opportunity. My kids are born in 2001 and 2003, so those first years I did maybe work only half time and more on the strategic. So I could cherry pick and do the real fun stuff with my brother and Oatly. Make sure we had a management team that ran the operations, but then work on the strategic level and spend a lot of time at home with my kids. But what I've learned too is that I want to have fun, and what's fun is work with young, bright kids and coach them and help them go places. And I realized that I have, over the years, built a lot of experience that, to me, so many things seem obvious, but when I sit down and share my thoughts and ideas with young entrepreneurs, magic happens, right? I learn from them, and I realize I can teach them a lot. And so, retired to do what?
Bjorn, I just want to play devil's advocate for a moment here, and even though I agree with everything you're saying, I think that some listeners may be thinking, well, we want to have fun too, right? We want to have a career where we're having a good time doing it. We're working on projects that we enjoy and working with people that we like and respect and trust. But a lot of times people, unfortunately, don't have that luxury of fun because at times, you need to make money, right? And so, and not at times, a lot of times, especially living in the United States and with how expensive things are, and it feels like inflation's at an all-time high, money is a key factor in people's lives. So as an experienced entrepreneur, what is your advice for folks listening now that need to make money but also have a good time doing it?
Huh. If I had the answer on that, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. No. It's a very good question, and I realize as you ask me, right, that in many ways I've been extremely fortunate. I've been able to, for the last 35 years, to do what I want to do, and it's been. Are those dogs destroying the recording?
Yeah, I'm used to those dogs barking all day at work.
Yeah. Somebody has walked into the door. Anyway, right. So I realized that I've been very fortunate in that sense, right? I've been able to do a lot of what I want to do, and as I've gotten more experience in season, I can sort of delegate off the routine work. It's obviously difficult for anyone to end up in that situation, but we're all different too. We value different things in life, right? I actually never cared about money. I never sought to, it's never interested me in fancy stuff. What really interests me and my family is travel, for example. Meeting people and travel. I could, if I was to retire, I would probably just do that, right? And experience and go and help people and engage in. I've actually just been taking a class. I don't know if you know about Team Rubicon. It's a really interesting organization founded originally by veterans here in the U.S. that do disaster relief projects, and it's fascinating to watch these people. I spent 3 days with some really fascinating people this just last weekend here, and learning about disaster recovery and whatnot, and interesting stuff.
What are your favorite places to travel? What are your favorite places to travel, or where have you been that is your favorite?
Well, I think I would say so. My favorite places to travel are the places I haven't been to.
Okay, the ones that you have been to. What are your top 3? Is it possible to have a top 3?
No, I don't think so. There's different aspects of everything, right? I'd never been to Latin America until just 2 years ago, when I started traveling to, for a period of time, I served on a board of a company in Peru. So I got to travel to Lima and see, and now I've been down to Argentina and Uruguay. My God, it's spectacular countries, right? Fascinating. And then you see Argentina, it's a completely dysfunctional society, but the people are awesome and the country is spectacular. But it's such a sad situation. But love to go there, love to travel there. I have yet to see Africa south of Sahara. I've been to Northern Africa a number of times, but never south of Sahara, and I want to do that. And ideally, my wife and I talk a lot about that. We can tie this with interesting projects. So I mentioned briefly, one of our research projects in Invention is actually working with, we have a kick-ass scientist from Sudan that trained in Sweden, and we're working on some very, very exciting products using baobab, the upside-down tree, very well known from the movie Madagascar, right? Very big fruits, very nutritious, really hard to do anything useful with. And if you can drive up the value and come up with, high value baobab products, there's you could help develop societies down there. You could change societies, right? Same thing we're doing, the work we're doing in Bolivia with farmers in the Alto Plano region, 12,000 feet above sea level, where there are now a bunch of farmers that are happily growing Swedish oats and selling and making money. And so I think the more time, the older I get, and the more, sort of helping, growing, and developing people in third world countries is something I really would like to spend more time with in the future.
Björn, when I look back to the story that you just told us, and obviously just, prior knowledge of Oatly and your work, it's very clear that, some of the things that you value are, obviously having a mission, right? Having a purpose for the work that you do, and having that purpose be a part of the companies that you've built. And secondly, just having a good time doing it. And I think the answer to that original question, while I was thinking about it, was that perhaps needing to make money, that's never going to change, right? People always
You need
aspire
to
to
eat.
do that.
You need
People
to
are,
survive. Yeah.
oh, right. Everybody needs it. But at the end of the day, I think those that eventually win, right? Not everybody, but a lot of those that end up winning and being successful are working for a long time, perhaps, on things that they do enjoy, things that they are passionate about, things that do fulfill their so-called purpose, whatever that purpose may be. And perhaps that's the main takeaway here, is that, pursue things, with purpose as opposed to maybe passion, right? And
Yeah.
who knows, you might be
Yeah.
successful, you might not, but
I
you'll be happy at the
encourage.
end of the day.
I have part of having fun is I get to speak to a lot of students at universities and different places, right? And it's really fun to see the eagerness and excitement in the eyes of these young students. But I think for me, my biggest message to everybody is to lead with your heart, right? It's really, it's exactly what you were just saying, really. It's don't go and take a job because it's better paid than somewhere else, right? Because you're just burning the candle at both ends. You're gonna end up sorry, because it's, yes, we need money, we need subsistence, we need to eat and send kids to school and pay the doctor's bills. But again, I came back to some of these people that I met in this class now, the Team Rubicon event. Some of them have absolutely no money, but they're really happy, grounded people that are dedicating their life to helping others because they're passionate about it, right? And you know what? Passion in people is contagious. When you see people that are passionate about something, it's like, you want to follow those people. You want to be with them. You want to play, you want them close, right? And that is so true in work life too, of course, right? If you don't have fun going to work and, you don't like your colleagues and it's, infighting and politics and all that stuff, well, there's a door and it's your choice. Go out there because there's so much to do in the world, right? And there's so many opportunities. And unfortunately, there are a good number of people that are also stuck in this whole prestige and and you have to do that. You have to, because it's expected of you, right? You're a victim of others' expectations and maybe to a certain extent your own expectation. But, very seldom as you see people that are happy and lucky, succeed in that space.
Well, Bjorn, you've obviously had an incredible journey, and I was one of those people that when I first heard about it was actually at an Expo West event that I learned about all these nut milks. I know Oatly was there, and there was the almond milks, there was the pistachio milks, the cashew milks, and I'm going, like, every other booth seemed like it was a plant-based milk, and I'm trying these things. Some of them were good, some of them were not as good. But I was thinking to myself, like, why ruin a good thing? In the beginning, that's what I was thinking. I was like, milk is fantastic. Why would anybody want to ruin it? And then over time, you kind of try it again. It's like you try it again, it gets a little better. And then now you just see that every single household, it's become a household product, right? Like we have oat milk and almond milk in our house, but we don't have real milk. We prefer the taste. We put it, like you said, in the coffees, in our smoothies, whatever. And so what you guys have done clearly over the past 25 plus years, which people didn't realize, of course, is that you built an incredible product that's changed the way people consume a product that they've known since the beginning of time. Yeah. So, that's just an incredible.
I'll challenge you on that, on the beginning of time, right? It's actually, that's another hour we could talk about that. But the way we drink milk, dairy cow milk today is not. It's new to mankind, right?
Interesting.
Started in the 1930s because before then we didn't have refrigeration and we didn't know how to pasteurize things. So what did the farmers do with their milk in the good old days? Well, to preserve it, they made butter, they made yogurt, and they made cheese. Drinking milk was very rare, and the bacteria under the cow and everything was actually quite associated with quite a risk to drink cow milk fresh out of the cow. I think certain regions, there's some interesting. I can go on and on for hours, but very quickly, Northern Europe.
I appreciate that correction.
Yeah, Northern Europe has among the lowest prevalence of lactose intolerance. Right, the normal human is designed to be lactose intolerant. It's the normal way to signal to the human that, okay, it's time to wean you off your mother's breast. Right, so that's the normal way. And then we have seen pockets of humans all over the planet that it's one gene. It's a simple change in your DNA, and so the good old Darwin is survival of the fittest. If you lived in the harsh climate in Northern Europe and could consume milk when you were really starving, you had a leg up over your competitors. Right. Same thing with for example, with the Maasai in Eastern Africa. They're lactose-tolerant. Who would have thought? Isn't that interesting? Surrounded by tribes that are not. Mm-hmm. And the list goes on. You can find that in different parts of the world, right? But the notion that the dairy industry likes to sell to us consumers that milk is something we have consumed in big volumes forever is so far from the truth. It is not true at all, right? And in fact, we have had in the 1930s, the Western world spent a lot of time educating its population. In Sweden, they had something called the milk propaganda. It was actually the name, where they did TV commercials. Well, TV was in the movie theaters at that time, right? You went to see the black and white movie. And it trained people that it's actually okay to drink milk. Because the normal reaction among the population was that, no, you don't drink milk. Yes, yogurt, yes, cheese, right? Butter, but not drink milk. So it's very interesting how it's turned around to be sort of, but we've always done it. So far from the truth.
Well, Björn, this has been really, really enjoyable conversation. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone listening did too. And we can't thank you enough for spending your time with us. Your evening, sharing your story and wisdom, and all the best. To you moving forward. I mean, obviously there's so much more exciting things to do, and we're excited to see the impact that you continue to make on the world. And pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, guys. It's a pleasure talking to you.